You're listening to INTERZONE Pod. My name is Gareth Jelley. I'm the editor of INTERZONE and IZ Digital, its online sister zine. You can find out more about INTERZONE and subscribe at interzone.press and read stories, reviews and interviews for free at interzone.digital. Joining me on the show today is Premee Mohamed. Hello, Premee Mohamed. Thank you very much for coming on INTERZONE Pod.
Hi, Gareth. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Well, we've spoken a couple of times before I was doing INTERZONE, and you've done so much in the last couple of years.
It probably looks like it. Yes, I'm very, very tired.
It seems that there's always a new Premee Mohamed story coming out. There was one even I saw today, which I read, a wonderful short story in Small Wonders. It has the sort of the science and it has the humor, the humanity, and it is kind of it's a great example of your sort of gift for voice, which I think is always what draws me. The fact that this is the way that you can kind of inhabit these different voices.
Oh, thank you very much.
This is imagine yourself happy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were a little surprised by the story because of the title.
Yeah, it is kind of a brutal one. You've got stories and anthologies, you've got stories coming out in different places, and I just sort of I imagine you must be very happy with everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's always nice to have the stories come out, to have them connect with people, to have people ping me afterwards to say, hey, I really liked that, or hey, there's something specific that you wrote about in there that is like something I've experienced. Like I had one come out, what was it, a couple days ago, I think, on Pseudopod, which was a reprint called The Evaluator, which was initially published in an anthology. And someone contacted me to be like, this really made me think of the time that I spent in the Appalachian Mountains. You captured the feel of it really well. And I was like, oh, thank you. I've never been there.
That you do a lot of good research and you're very good at lying, which is
which is the less kind way, I guess, to call fiction writing.
Lying with research. I don't know, maybe
lying with research onto paper for money.
Artfully, hopefully. Yeah, you also have lots of books on the way, and we'll come to those sort of like specifically, sort of one by one, because we do have to kind of itemize them. You also have a recent short story collection, which No One Will Come Back for Us from Undertow Publications. You have the Nick and Johnny trilogy, Beneath the Rising, A Broken Darkness, and The Void Ascendant. There's, I have to take a breath. There's the novella, And What Can We Offer You Tonight from Neon Hemlock, which won a Nebula Award. There's also The Annual Migration of Clouds from ECW Press, which won an Aurora Award. So many stories. And I wonder, like, do you, when you have your ideas initially, do you always know how far they can grow, how far they can go? And, do you know that this is going to be a short story?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually talking about this recently with a friend because I think it's taken some calibration. I have had previously found that stories that I thought were going to be short stories, ballooned into a novel, or stories that I thought were going to be, at best, a novelette turning into a novella. But now it's a lot easier for me to figure that out kind of when I have the initial idea. And it's kind of hard to explain, I guess, but it's almost like holding the idea in your hand and feeling kind of how heavy it is. Like not exactly like a ripe fruit, but like a box with something in it, and being like, this is quite heavy. This could be a novel, or this is kind of medium weight. I think what this is going to have to be is a novella. And I'm getting pretty good at calibrating to novellas. You'll probably have noticed I've got 3, possibly 4 novellas coming out next year and just one novel. So I'm really leaning into the novella form, even though it's not the most I guess profitable form, but it's a length that I keep having ideas for. And sometimes I let my agent know that, and sometimes I don't.
And they are very happy to receive work in whatever form it is.
Yes, sure. He's been surprised by quite a few of them, but never anything less than extremely delighted and enthusiastic. Like with The Butcher of the Forest, which is coming out next year, I just kind of threw that at him and was like, hey, there's an editor at Tor that says he might like to read this, so if we're putting it out on sub, can he read it first? And his response was, where did this come from? I didn't know you were writing this. It just appeared. I'm so sorry. It was probably the fairies.
Yeah. So you have these novellas, and then what was my next question? In your notes for the Redoubtables in No One Will Come Back for Us, you talk about sort of approaching the same idea from different perspectives, and then finding an approach that worked. Does that happen a lot? Is that part of sort of weighing things up in your hand, that you're sort of having to like test it in different sort of forms?
Yeah, sometimes, not very frequently though, which I think is what really struck me about that story. The way I usually end up writing stories, particularly short stories, is I have an idea first, or just a couple of ideas that I want to smush together, or a premise, kind of a what if question. What if someone was doing the kind of research that you had to destroy instantly if it started to go wrong, and that meant destroying everybody that was working on it too, and that was considered reasonable. So I usually start with the idea, and then I ask myself, how best do I want people to receive this idea? And from that question, that's how I come up with the characters. I usually don't start with characters. Most of my stuff doesn't start with the character. It starts with the idea. So for this one, I thought it would be fairly straightforward, but it just kept not feeling right or evoking the feelings that I wanted. I didn't realize, I wanted a certain amount of distance on it, on what happened, and to take this obvious atrocity and have somebody investigate it, later on, instead of in the moment or in the direct aftermath. And I felt intuitively like that worked a lot better, and I enjoyed writing the story a lot better. And it sold on its first time out, which was nice.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's a good sign. Talking about kind of ideas and having this sort of what if, you gave a really interesting sort of seminar or class on, I forget the title. I think it was like putting the science into science fiction, or.
Oh yeah. I love teaching that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a really interesting class about, about research. And are you, is that kind of how you're looking at science news, that you're sort of taking it and sort of asking always, what is the storyable what if here?
Oh, pretty often. Yeah. I like to find something and save it, just, like a pack rat, just hoarding it for later articles, or even just snippets of things, screenshots of things that end up becoming part of a story later. That was kind of what happened with today's story, Imagine Yourself Happy. It was just something that snagged on my mind, like a fingernail on a sweater, in a recent book I was reading, an Ed Young book called An Immense World, which is about kind of the sensorium of non-human animals and how we can try to approximate what they're experiencing with their senses, but we really can't, because they've got senses we don't have, and we've got senses they don't have. And, we can't exactly explain what it's like to be a mantis shrimp. We can't see that way, that kind of thing. But I fixated on the idea that there are creatures out there with optical apparatus much, much quicker than ours. So it's probable that they would see a flash of light that we would not even know had happened. And then it just kind of turned into the story. Instead of being a flash of light, it's a flash of radiation from an alien creature.
Yeah. It's great to have a piece of actual flash fiction. Here we actually have it. Yeah, it is a genuine flash.
Yeah, it's a piece of flash fiction with a flash in it. Yeah.
And you're talking about the animals. The sort of I mean, technically, without saying, without saying too much about it, but you mentioned the cat, and there's all these little, just really kind of nice touches that do a huge amount in a very, very small, word, in the word count, which is just great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Flash is actually quite tricky for me, because as you say, everything has to do a lot of work. The shorter the story is, the more work every word has to do, every sentence has to do. You can't, walk around like you're in a novel and go off on tangents and have side quests and road trips and day trips and whatever. So I actually don't write a lot of Flash, and I'm surprised that this one ended up at Flash length. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah, it's a. What one writer mentioned it was talking about sort of vignettes and how one of her stories had been, I think, described it negatively perhaps, or maybe neutrally, as a vignette, more a vignette than a story. But I think that's I don't. It's interesting because like really good Flash has a lot of story. Like that story we're talking about there, there's a lot of story in that, right? So
yeah. And that, I think it's often unfair to call Flash a vignette, because that's by the kind of purists that are like, no, a story has to have a plot, and the plot has to look like this, and it has to have this type of structure. Whereas with Flash, I think all those expectations should really be thrown out the window. I've read a lot of Flash that did appear to be an anecdote or a vignette, and it worked perfectly as a story, even though it didn't have a traditional beginning, middle, end in terms of action. A Flash can just be one moment, or one memory, or a prose poem, if we want it to be. I don't think people should be judging Flash by short story standards, if that makes any sense.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that was also what we came, during that discussion. One of the things that was said was, sort of judging stories or reading stories on their own terms, rather than sort of bringing sort of exterior criteria to them. In that wider discussion, I think there is often this, as you say, people are measuring something with the wrong sort of, with the wrong sort of tools, so to speak. And stories can work in all sorts of ways, right?
Yeah.
You posted on Blue Sky part of a review of your forthcoming The Butcher of the Forest, which is genuinely magical and magically told. Like the telling is really, really, for me, was really, really powerful. And this review described it as having a flat fairy tale like quality. And you posted that was precisely the effect you were going for.
Yes, I was delighted. Yeah.
And I wondered if I wonder if you could sort of introduce INTERZONE listeners to that book, and also to that effect that you were going for.
Oh, I can try. So The Butcher of the Forest is a novella that's coming out with Tor.com in February 2024. It's the story of Varys Thorn, who is a woman who, a long time ago, and for reasons we are not aware of at the start of the book, managed to rescue a child for the first time ever, probably in history, from the dangerous woods in the north of her village. And now in this book, she has been tasked by the tyrant who has colonized her village, her country, to rescue his children who have gotten lost in the forest. And she only has a day to do so. And if she doesn't, her family, her village, her life, if she comes back out, are forfeit. So she's got a lot of motivation to attempt this rescue, but it's not that easy, and it's not an ordinary forest.
And you have a great comp for this, a really funny but also very, very astute comp for this. Do you want to share it?
Yeah, a friend compared it to, I can't remember what theirs was, but mine was Escape from LA meets Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, and I don't think that's wrong. Theirs was Hansel and Gretel meets, and I don't remember what, but the basic gist is we have to go rescue someone's child, but for several reasons, we're not doing it voluntarily, and we're not doing it even because we think it's sad and terrible that kids are lost somewhere dangerous. We're also being coerced by a very dangerous person. So it's also kind of the anti-colonization talk, I guess, because the kids weren't responsible for all the deaths and the war, but does that mean still that you go get them? Or does it mean you defy the father by saying, no, I'm not going to do what you want? Or does it mean you preserve your own life and do what you're told? Or, I don't know what I would do in Varys' situation. It's very messy, which I guess is not adding to the fairy tale feel of it. But what I did want it to feel really intensely like an obscure fairy tale, like something you could actually tell if you wanted to in, 3 or 4 paragraphs, like in a kid's book. And all I did was retell it, kind of was the feel I wanted to have.
It's a very vivid sort of retelling of this, if it is a retelling. And I wonder sort of, how did that voice come out?
Yeah, this one just whipped out like a ripcord, starting from the day that I had the dream, which I think I mentioned in the tour announcement for it, that this actually came out of a dream, which is, people make fun of writers for saying, oh, I saw this story in a dream. But I think for a lot of us, we're not trying to recreate the dream in the story because dreams don't make narrative sense. Often we're just trying to capture the images or an image that we remember. So from the day that I had the dream to when it was done was something like 3 weekends, maybe like 5-ish writing sessions.
Oh, wow.
It felt very intuitive to tell it in that way, with that slightly formalized, slightly stiff fairy tale language that tells you that, this is a fantasy and that this isn't contemporary and that we're getting just enough distance on the third person point of view to get into Varys's head, but not really see what anyone else is thinking or imagining or remembering unless they tell us. So yeah, it didn't take a lot of this is going to sound bad. It didn't take a lot of writing. It's not very long either. It didn't take a lot of writing. It did not take a lot of editing. And I was very pleased when Tor acquired it and when Jonathan's editing was very light, actually. He kept a very light touch on the manuscript. He preserved all that language, all the idiosyncrasies and the punctuation and the way people speak and the slightly unusual way that some of the characters speak, like the fox, which I was really pleased about. Like, I do want it to feel a little bit otherworldly because fairy tales happen in a world that is, next to ours, but not ours.
Another book coming out next year is... that I know of, a week or two after The Butcher of the Forest, is The Siege of Burning Grass.
Yeah.
I'm still reading this one. I'm enjoying it.
Oh, thank you.
And the blurb describes it as a stunning meditation on war, nationalism, violence, and courage, which is a lot, particularly right now. And what can you tell listeners about The Siege of Burning Grass and also about what that book means to you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is kind of a weird, heavy one, especially, talking right now with what's happening in Gaza and with the Ukraine-Russia conflict still going on. A couple of months before I was due to hand in that manuscript was when the Ukraine-Russia conflict started, and I found myself thinking, my God, I'm writing a war novel during a war. Like this, I'm not enjoying this. This doesn't feel good. Like this, it felt like writing a plague novel during a plague, and also something I didn't want to do. But the idea for this one kind of came out of I had this idea of a pacifist during a war who is tasked with some non-jail punishment. And literally that's all the idea was at the start. And I kind of sat with it for a while. To me, it felt novel scale. It felt almost Russian novel scale, to the point where I thought, oh, if I write this, I'm going to have to cut it back from 350,000 words because that's how much this is going to be. But I thought, this doesn't have to turn into Tolstoy. If I keep the focus on this pacifist and just keep the orbitals around him about the war, then maybe it will be a reasonable sized novel. And again, my editor, David Moore at Solaris, really thought so as well. He really loved the book, which again, you hope so because he's your editor. But again, he kept a very light touch on it. He wanted it to kind of sound the way it sounded, to be the way it was. So this book is about that pacifist, Alevret, who is bombed, it looks like accidentally, by friendly fire, wounded very severely, locked up for being a traitor to his own side, for resisting the war, for protesting the war, for not helping the war effort, and is offered his freedom in exchange for escorting another soldier, a fanatic, actually, to one of the enemy's last strongholds in order to overtake it and therefore cause their surrender and end the war. And it almost but not quite works out like that. But, this goes against all his principles. But again, it's another case where I guess there's a thematic similarity to The Butcher of the Forest, which is a person who has proven that they are good at something is just asked to do that thing again and again, even if they don't want to.
And this is this is novel length. This is I think the page count is 430 or something. Yeah, this is
yeah, I think it's 109,000 words or something like that.
And so sort of world building for the Tor one versus world building for the Rebellion Solaris one. What kind of what it sounds like the Tor one just came, almost sort of came out fully formed, whereas this one maybe was it sort of, did it take longer to build the world and to kind of see it?
To kind of see it, yeah, specifically to see it. For The Butcher of the Forest, I saw that one really, really clearly, not just because I'd seen that initial image in the dream and just kind of had to extrapolate from that. But for this one, it was like, well, I know I'm writing a war novel, but what kind of war is it? Where is it taking place? How is it unusual compared to other wars I've, say, written or read about or seen in movies? This isn't really enemy at the gates, but it's also not all quiet on the Western Front, and it's. I think what I wanted to focus on was the idea that although war touches everything in a country, or the countries that are participating, the war isn't happening everywhere in the country generally. So there's quite a bit of the book, which you'll have seen if you're reading it, where Alefret and Kudur are moving through a landscape that's been, destroyed by the war or damaged by the war. They're occasionally encountering people who have survived the fighting, but technically the fighting's over. So all that's left now is the aftermath and just this very distinct lack of rebuilding. It's almost the end of the world for some of these places. They'll never go back to what they were. They're well aware that all the people there will just have to move. They can't live there anymore. So it's obviously it's an anti-war novel, but it's also trying to think about the knock-on effects of the fighting itself and what happens to civilians and who gets to live and who gets drafted into the fighting and who just gets, picked on.
Yeah. And you said you were writing that as the war was going on in Ukraine.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to remember the date. I think I had to hand it in May 31st. And all that started sometime in like March or something like that. I didn't go back and change anything in the book, but it was constantly on my mind as I was finishing. Just, I hope I'm not writing, disrespectfully or flippantly about war. I don't think I am, but yeah.
No, I don't think so at all. And I think it's always, but that is always the question, right? Particularly when you started something before and then something happens in the middle. The blurb for that one, for The Siege of Burning Grass, which is out in March 2024, also describes you as a rising star of the genre.
Who wrote that? That was probably my editor.
But the question is, rising star of which genre? It doesn't specify.
I don't think I'm a rising star. If I was, I would be able to pay my bills. But I think we're going to have to say speculative fiction. I write so much stuff that is science fiction touching fantasy, or fantasy elements in science fiction, or horror elements smushed into all of the above. I mean, look at, and what can we offer you tonight? Which won the World Fantasy Award, which won the Nebula Award.
Right.
It's set in a far future dystopia with various sci-fi trappings, like location tracking watches that are embedded into your skin. And also, there's a dead woman who's brought back to life for reasons we have no clue about, and it's never gone into. That's basically magic.
Yeah, for sure. And then your rebellion novella, you could also, is also has speculative or SF trappings, but also has lots of elements from other genres.
Yeah, I like it when genres touch. And I was grateful when I learned the term speculative fiction, because I thought, there we go. That's the big umbrella. We can put everything in. We don't have to call something sci-fi. We don't have to call something fantasy. We can just say it's speculative.
Sticking with genre, you in 2020 you wrote an essay for Nightmare magazine called the H Word, an empathy of fear, and you wrote there this great line. You wrote, "Fear guides more of our behaviour than we can be consciously aware of," and you look at how fear comes into play in all sorts of different ways in different genres, and you also quote Toni Morrison, and the quote is, "Isn't the brutality of your fellow humans scary too?" And yeah, I wonder sort of, is this sort of fascination with human behavior and with fear a thread that you see running through a lot of your work?
Yeah, I think I do. I don't know if it's always entirely on purpose. Like, every now and then I'll get solicited to write something, and they'll be like, this is a horror magazine, or this is a horror anthology, so make sure that fear, like you're talking about, is sort of very, foremost. But I think also in just my normal writing, where I'm not trying to make it horror,
Right.
what I am thinking about in terms of character development is not so much what does the character want, or what is the character's goal for this story, but what do the characters fear? And if they have a goal, why do they fear not getting it? What do they fear happening to them if they fail? And I tend to start to construct my characters from that point, from what they're afraid of, rather than what they desire. So that also gets to feed into what all the villains or the antagonistic forces are doing, which is, whether they're doing it deliberately or not, playing on that fear, intensifying that fear, creating that fear if they can to get what they want.
That's really interesting. Going for the fears, not the desires, and also in this new story, Imagine Yourself Happy. Was that on your mind as well, the fear?
Yeah, it really was. Because clearly the unnamed narrator is working with something hugely dangerous. We see quick mentions of the safety protocols that they have in place. He knows he's made a mistake, and that's
right.
The thing he's feared the whole time is making a mistake. And we also see something, I think, a little more subtle, which is that he fears, or feared, dying without contributing what he felt was kind of his fair share to science or to the future. And I think in this story, he actually gains a little bit of solace, a little bit of comfort, maybe a little bit of peace from the way that he's dying, because he thinks that, hey, even if I did make this mistake, even if this is the end of my life, I am contributing to science. That's the last thing I'm going to do, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, there is. Yes, there is solace there. Your third book of 2024, third that I know of, third so far, is a follow-up to The Annual Migration of Clouds, and it has another splendid title, We Speak Through the Mountain. The publication date for that is June 2024. And yeah, kind of picking up on maybe on the negatives. Sorry, but the blurb for this one says that you ask in the book whether humanity is doomed to forever recreate its worst mistakes, and I suppose without spoiling the book, do you think we are?
Yes. Oh, I guess I can elaborate. You know,
No. We can see. I mean, we could just cut it right there.
we can just cut it right there. Yes, we are. Yeah. I mean, we're watching it happen right now. We're watching it happen every day. We haven't learned a thing from COVID. About one person dies per day here in Alberta, where I live, from COVID. We've got the vaccines, we've got masks, we've got nasal sprays, we've got social distancing, we've got every tool that we should have to have ended the epidemic, and it's still going on. And same with, I think, a lot of other really large-scale things. The ongoing climate disaster, hostilities worldwide, things that we have the tools and the knowledge to fix, and we know we do, but we're doing the exact same thing we've been doing for centuries.
Yes.
Which I guess makes for a slightly depressing book, but I still, I guess I shouldn't have found it so strange, but when the annual Migration of Clouds came out in 2021, it was immediately kind of slotted into climate fiction or eco-fiction. And I thought that was so strange because I thought it was quite clear that what I had written was a disability book, was a book about a disease. But instead, what everybody fixated on was the setting.
Right.
And I thought, well, that definitely won't happen again. And then ECW came back to me and was like, hey, we would like some sequels. And I was like, oh, so they do want more climate fiction, and it's specifically climate fiction that I have been asked to write. Okay, I can do that.
Okay, so in that case, kind of like reactions or the way it was pitched, sort of fed back into the sort of the longer story. That's fascinating.
Very much so. Yeah, when the book was very, very much written as a standalone, I wanted and insisted on that very open ending. I wanted for people to not know what happened to the character at the end. I wanted for a lot of the questions in the story to deliberately go unanswered forever. But I also have bills to pay. So when they asked about 2 more books, I was like, yeah, okay, I'll write 2 more books. I'm not sticking to my guns that hard.
You said earlier that about the rising star bit in the blurb. I don't know who wrote it, but if you it doesn't feel maybe like that in terms of the bills to pay. Do you feel like I mean, this is something we kind of touched on in earlier interviews where talked about the state of how publishing supports writers and just generally how hard it is. Does it still feel as hard as it felt, a year, 2, 3 years ago in terms of...
Oh, much harder.
Much harder.
Much harder. Because back then there was this kind of sense of, I guess, uncertainty. Like, what are my books going to do? Am I ever going to get another book deal? How are they going to sell? And now with a couple of years of, not just the knowledge, but also the royalty reports, being able to look at the actual numbers. Just as an example, this year, 2023, as of end of September 2023, the total amount of royalties that I've made off all my books is $3,500 Canadian. So, I'm not exactly swimming in money. So it does, that to me, that's kind of confirmation that my perception that I'm writing things that people don't want to read is sort of being borne out by the numbers and sort of being like, all the books that I've sold for all of, half of 2022 and part of 2023 does not even cover a month of my bills. I'm going to have to go out and get a day job again because I'm not writing things that are, the big commercial bestsellers. But I guess we'll see what happens after 2024, which is the year of 4, possibly 5 books.
I suppose it's almost like you're running a scientific experiment where you're sort of, okay, so if I publish 5 books in this period of time, what is the outcome? What are the results?
Yeah, what is the outcome? Because the advances also have been fairly low, like nothing to write home about. So, I really am counting on royalties. But and I'm even excited about that 4th book, which we haven't talked about, but that's going to be, I keep calling it a novella. It's actually not just a novella. It's going to be a mini collection with Psychopomp Press.
Oh.
So that's going to be a new novella called One Message Remains, plus a reprint of my story, The General's Turn, which was in the Deadlands, and 2 new novelettes. So I'm pretty excited for that. I also had a friend today ask me if The Siege of Burning Grass, which he's reading for a blurb, which, thank you, Jonathan, is actually in the same world as The General's Turn. And I was like, oh, not on purpose, but I do seem to be writing about 2 countries in an endless, pointless war,
right,
a lot lately.
so they could be, maybe. They
could very easily be. I don't think they're in the same time period because, just as an example, in The General's Turn, they've only just gotten electricity, but and I don't think they're in the same area. But I see them as being in the same world now that he mentioned it.
Ah, okay. The power of feedback.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself? Do you find certain worlds or certain characters that you've written sort of? Yeah, not so much come back to haunt you, but do you find yourself drawn back into them and thinking about other stories?
Oh yeah, constantly. I keep having to stop myself from simply making every story I write, a prequel or a sequel or a sidequel of something else that I wrote. You even see it a little bit in my short story collection, where there are 2 worlds, 2 stories set in the same world. There's The Evaluator and there's Us and Ours, which are happening at almost the same time.
So that's the 4th one. So you mentioned the Psychopomp one, and the 5th one. Can you hint that, or is that?
Yeah, I can hint. Possibly, if I can't talk them into moving it into 2025, because of course, at this rate, I'll have 4 novellas all competing against each other for any award slots, if there are any. It would be nicer to just have 3 competing against each other for those slots. But yeah, this would be a novella with a small press, which hasn't been announced, and which actually I still have to hand in. It's actually due mid-November. And this, I think we're going to have to go ahead and call it a weird Western.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
So it's like, yeah, so it's a bit The Unforgiven with cosmic horror.
The Unforgiven with cosmic. Okay. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, I hope people enjoy this one. It's not very much my usual thing, but I've always really wanted to write a slightly longer form Western, not necessarily a novel. I don't think I can hold up a novel, but I thought it would be interesting to at least try it in novella form. And as you pointed out in our email exchange, I have a story coming out in an anthology called Playlist of the Damned.
Right.
That is also, this is a Western story as well. It's called I Am He.
So that's another Western, and that jogs my memory. You have you have another story in the MIT collection, which is it AI related?
Yeah. That story is called At Every Door a Ghost, and it's actually kicked off by the usual sci-fi tradition, I guess we'd call it, of a technology that humanity has developed that we think is going to be great and is going to help us and fix everything, going terribly, terribly wrong. For reasons we are not 100% sure of. And what really triggers the story is, it's focused on a small cast of academics, researchers. And what really kicks off the story is that there is a worldwide pact for people to stop working on certain types of actual artificial intelligence because they've seen what went wrong with this one. But of course, it doesn't really answer the question of how do you shut down an artificial intelligence if it has achieved something close enough to sentience to prevent you from doing that.
And if it is no longer actually contained.
Yeah, if it's not contained. Yeah. So that's asking a question I hope we never have to answer. But
right.
I have another AI-related story actually coming out in an Apex anthology, I think in like just a week or 2 here. Called The Robots Live Here Now. And this is a cute little story. This is about 2 kids trying to find out if they're playing this very sort of old buggy city builder game, almost like Sim City.
Okay.
And they've become friends with another player, and this other player all of a sudden tells them that they're an AI. So the kids are trying to find out if that's true or not. And I think it's a cute little story.
And that's in an Apex anthology.
Yeah.
So it's Playlist of the Damned is the one anthology, and it's the MIT one. I'm blanking on the title.
12 Tomorrows is the series. I think this one's called Communications Breakdown.
And yeah, so lots and lots of different Premee Mohamed stories to look for.
Oh, also, sorry, and The Reinvented Detective, which is coming out in December. There's an AI story in that.
Okay.
That one's edited by Jennifer Brozek and Kat Rambo, and I think that's coming out mid-December, like December 12th.
Oh, right. Oh, they edited have they? What was the one that was in? Kelly Jennings reviewed that one.
That may have been The Reinvented Heart, which I was also in.
Kelly liked that one. One more plug. I was on NetGalley and I saw one more plug after all the short stories, and I saw that ECW Press are bringing out an audiobook of And What Can We Offer You Tonight, which I didn't realize was on its way.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that. Yeah, it's when I talked about that with my agent, when we talked about shopping around audio rights, he said, well, for novellas, it can be kind of a hard sell because there's not really enough audio running time to make it, economical for someone to offer you a lot of money for the rights. It's different with a novel. But, we did talk to ECW. They do have their own audiobook group. I think it's called Bespoke Audio. And even though that novella is so short, it's like 21,000 words, so less than 3 hours of audio, they still took it on. And I think they did a fantastic job.
That's it's in the NetGalley app, so I'm hoping to listen to it soon.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no, I'm keen because I'm keen to see how that one, because I think what happens is I tend to read your stories in twos. So I read These Lifeless Things and then maybe almost right afterwards read And What Can We Offer You Tonight, and they're such different books. Mm-hmm. And then I sort of feel like I have to sort of like I want to go back to them and sort of put space between them, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I liked the audio version of These Lifeless Things as well, because that has two narrators in text. And then when Solaris did it, they also hired two different narrators to read the two different voices. So I was very pleased they did that.
Is that world, these Lifeless Things, is that world a world that sort of you feel is sort of like the door's closed, it's self-contained, or is that also one of those ones where you feel there's more story maybe?
Lots more story. There is at least one other story set in that world, which didn't make it into the short story collection. My editor cut that out. But that was from the Sockdolager, and it was Ensnare of Cold Command, which is basically a side quill to These Lifeless Things because it's happening at the same time. And actually in Lifeless, they mention some of the events that happen at the end of Sneer, the fireworks specifically. So
more story there.
Yeah. More story there. Lots more story there.
The Premeeverse. I really enjoyed your own reading of episode 4, The Deflection of Probability, which was on Story Hour. That was a great reading. You've got this really kind of it was a really kind of pleasant, chilled out reading. And then
thank you.
You did a story that I think I listened to twice, almost back to back, and it was As Well as the Infirm by Scott Beggs, which was a great reading of yours for Pseudopod.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. Thank you. Yeah, I don't do a ton of narration, but I remember that one. That one was very, very squishy and gory, and yeah.
What was the line at the end? Like a skull full of teeth or something? Something
like that.
And yeah, so that one, do check that one out. That's As Well as the Infirm by Scott Beggs, and also The Deflection of Probability, which was that originally Escape Pod?
Yeah, that was originally Escape Pod. They bought that one.
And the question I had was, like, are you listening when you write? Like when you draft or edit, are you hearing yourself or your narrators telling the story?
Yeah, that's, and again, I was just talking about this with a friend. When she writes, she basically sees, like images, sometimes moving, sometimes not, and then she describes them. So she told me, I've always had a very tough time with dialogue because the images, no one's talking.
Okay.
And then for me, I'm actually very much the other way. It's all language, it's all words. And what takes me a while often is figuring out what a place looks like, or what a structure or a building looks like, or like in Butcher, I don't think Varys is even described as looking like anything,
Right.
in the annual migration of clouds, I have no mental image of what Reed looks like, and she narrates the entire book.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. So you hear her, but you couldn't play sort of like cast a character.
I hear it. Yeah. Yeah. I hear it really quite clearly for a lot of stories. And sometimes I feel like I'm just sort of, tilting my head a little bit like a puppy trying to listen. And then I'm just writing it down.
Oh, that really chimes with me, because I do feel that with reading your stories, I do feel that kind of sensitivity to voice, and that kind of, as I mentioned earlier on, that sort of that kind of pulling voices out, and then the distinctiveness between them, I think is what I just find so enjoyable.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I was just re-listening to part of a pseudopod recording, 4 Hours of a Revolution, which was narrated by Alistair Stewart's dad, Ian Stewart. And I love the work that they did turning that into audio, because I did have kind of a, that mental image of what the voice of death sounded like in my head. And then they chose Ian as the narrator, and I thought, this is absolutely and completely perfect. This just jives exactly with how I would have narrated it, except I can't, because I don't sound like that. So I thought they just did a wonderful job on that story, just elevated it so much from the text.
That's great. And that people can find that where?
That's on Pseudopod. The episode is called 4 Hours of a Revolution.
Okay, 4 Hours of the Revolution.
Yeah.
And the last question, kind of wrapping up, is there anything you want to signal boost by other people, or anything you've kind of really enjoyed that you want to mention?
Oh gosh, almost too much to think about right now. But I think in general, short fiction venues are having a really hard time. So I would encourage listeners to see if they can find it in their budget to manage a yearly subscription to a short fiction venue or to support them on their Patreon, because there are a lot that are going to go under probably in the next couple of years, and they can't survive without loyal readers and paying readers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'd kind of add to that, sort of as an editor, a publisher of a magazine, I would say that for absolutely yes, the subscriptions, or joining a Patreon, or even just sending a one-off donation, but also talk about the stories you love as much as possible everywhere. Mm-hmm. Just like tell people about them if you can, or boost them, because there are so many. And sort of what I hear from readers sometimes is that sort of filtering out, which stories are going to connect. And with short fiction in particular, it's the same with books and the same with everything. But yeah, recommendations really do make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Word of mouth makes a huge difference, especially when there's, 50 short stories coming out a day. People have to yell about their favorites. Yeah.
There are so many short stories, including yours, which is a great way to circle back to Imagine Yourself Happy. Yeah.
Oh, nice segue.
Okay, so lots and lots of things to look forward to. Thank you very much for coming on the show, and I hope we can talk again the next time you have something out, which or soon anyway. That would be great.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Gareth. This was awesome.
You've been listening to INTERZONE Pod with me, Gareth Jelley, and my guest, Premee Mohamed. Subscribe to INTERZONE at interzone.press and read stories for free at INTERZONE's online sister zine, IZ Digital. Thanks for listening.